What if everything you learned about European history was missing the most important chapter? What if an African king once marched his armies across Europe, conquering kingdoms, and yet his name was deliberately erased from every history book you've ever read? This is that forbidden story. History is written by the winners. But sometimes, the winners decide to erase the stories that don't fit their narrative. Today, we're uncovering one of the most shocking cover-ups in human history. A tale so incredible, so world-changing, that powerful people spent centuries trying to bury it. Before we dive into this mind-blowing story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this channel is dedicated to bringing you the hidden histories they never taught you in school. Drop a like if you're ready to have your mind blown. And stick around until the end, because the way this story was erased will shake everything you thought you knew about history. Trust me, you've never heard anything like this before. Let's begin. Our story begins in the year 710, in a kingdom that stretched across North Africa. This wasn't some small territory. This was one of the richest, most advanced civilizations on Earth. While Europe was stumbling through what historians call the Dark Ages, this African empire had universities, libraries filled with thousands of books, advanced mathematics, medicine, and architecture that would make European castles look like children's toys. The king who ruled this land was a military genius. From a young age, he studied warfare, strategy, and the art of commanding men. He didn't just inherit his throne. He earned it through brilliant campaigns, uniting fractured tribes, and building an army that was feared across 3 continents. His soldiers were different from anything Europe had ever seen. They used advanced tactics, superior weapons, and a level of discipline that European knights couldn't match. They had cavalry units that moved like lightning, infantry formations that held strong against any charge. And most importantly, they had something European armies lacked: a reason to fight beyond just gold and land. This king looked north across the narrow strait that separated Africa from Europe. He saw kingdoms fighting each other, weak and divided. He saw opportunity, but he also saw something else. European ships had been raiding his coastlines for years, taking his people as slaves, stealing resources, spreading fear. It was time to end that. It was time to show Europe that Africa was not some backward land to be plundered. It was time to make them understand the price of disrespect. In the spring of 711, the king made his decision. He would cross into Europe, not to raid, not to pillage and leave. No, he was going to conquer. He was going to build an empire that spanned 2 continents. He was going to change the world forever. He gathered his generals, his most trusted commanders. Together, they planned something that seemed impossible. They would take an army across the water, land on European soil, and march inland. They would take cities, defeat armies, and establish a new order. His advisors warned him. They said Europe was too big, too strong. They said his army would be swallowed up by the endless European kingdoms. They said history would forget him. The king smiled. He had different plans. With 7,000 soldiers, he set sail. 7,000 against entire kingdoms. Most military minds would call this suicide. But this wasn't just any army. These were trained warriors who had conquered everything in their path. Men who believed in their cause. Men who were ready to write their names into history. The ships crossed the strait. The African army landed on European beaches. And the invasion began. Europe would never be the same. The first battle was supposed to be a quick European victory. The local king gathered his forces, over 40,000 men, knights in heavy armor, foot soldiers with spears and shields, archers, the full might of a European kingdom. They looked down at the African army and laughed. 7,000 men against 40,000. This would be a massacre, just not the one they expected. The battle lasted 8 days, 8 days of brutal combat. The African forces used tactics Europe had never seen. They moved in coordinated units. They feigned retreats to draw enemies into traps. They used their superior mobility to strike fast and disappear. They fought with a discipline that stunned their opponents. When it was over, the European king was dead. His army was destroyed, and the African forces had lost fewer than 300 men. News of the battle spread like wildfire across Europe. Panic set in. Churches rang their bells in alarm. Kings held emergency meetings. Messengers rode day and night carrying warnings. An African army was marching through Europe, and no one could stop them. City after city fell. Some tried to fight. They gathered their armies, their knights, their best warriors. It didn't matter. The African forces were too skilled, too organized, too determined. Other cities simply opened their gates and surrendered. They had heard what happened to those who resisted. Within months, the African king controlled a massive portion of European territory. His armies had pushed deep into the continent, further than anyone thought possible. They established garrisons, built fortifications, set up supply lines. This wasn't a raid. This was permanent conquest. The Europeans were terrified. For the first time in their history, they were the ones being conquered. They were the ones watching foreign armies march through their streets. They were the ones seeing their castles occupied by soldiers who didn't speak their language, who came from a land they barely understood. The African king didn't just conquer land. He transformed it. He brought new ideas, new technologies, new ways of thinking. The territories under his control began to change. Libraries opened, universities were founded, art and science flourished, medical knowledge improved, mathematical concepts that Europe wouldn't discover for centuries were being taught in schools. For 30 years, the African Empire controlled vast portions of Europe. 30 years where African culture, knowledge, and power shaped European society. Trade routes connected Africa directly to European markets. Scholars from both continents exchanged ideas. Architecture blended African and European styles. But empires, even the greatest ones, faced challenges. Internal politics began to fracture the African holdings. Different generals wanted different things. Some wanted to push deeper into Europe. Others wanted to consolidate what they had. Others wanted to return home wealthy and celebrated. European kingdoms, meanwhile, were learning. They studied African tactics. They built stronger alliances. They stopped fighting each other and focused on the common threat. Slowly, painfully, they organized resistance. The tide began to turn, not all at once, not with one great battle. But gradually, the African empire in Europe started to contract. Territories were lost. Armies retreated. The endless European winter wore down troops used to warmer climates. The king, now older, faced a choice: hold everything and risk losing it all, or pull back and keep what mattered most. He chose strategic withdrawal. He maintained control over key territories, particularly in the south, but allowed the northern regions to slip away. His death, when it came, was mourned across 2 continents. He had ruled for over 4 decades. He had achieved what no one thought possible. He had proven that African military genius could match and exceed anything Europe could produce. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. After the king's death, something strange happened in European historical records. His conquests, which had dominated European life for decades, began to shrink in the telling. First, historians minimized his achievements. They wrote that he was just lucky, that European armies were distracted, that it wasn't really a conquest, just a raid. Then they started erasing him altogether. They removed his name from chronicles. They destroyed documents that detailed his victories. They rewrote battles to make European losses seem smaller, less significant. They invented fictional European heroes who supposedly stopped him, even though those heroes never existed. Within a few generations, the story had changed completely. European children learned that their continent had always been strong, always been dominant. They learned that Africa was a place to be conquered, not a source of conquering armies. The African king who had brought European kingdoms to their knees became a footnote, then a rumor, then forgotten. Why did this happen? Simple. European powers, especially during the colonial era, needed a narrative. They needed to believe, and make others believe, that Europeans were superior, that they had always been the conquerors, never the conquered, that Africa was backward and weak. An African king who conquered Europe didn't fit that story, so they erased him. But truth has a way of surviving. Archaeological evidence kept turning up. Buildings he commissioned, coins minted in his name, weapons forged by his armories, trade routes he established, written accounts from witnesses who lived through his reign. Modern historians, free from colonial propaganda, started piecing it together. They found Arabic manuscripts that detailed his campaigns. They discovered European church records that mentioned him, buried in archives. They analyzed DNA evidence that showed massive African migration into southern Europe during his era. The evidence became overwhelming. The African king who conquered Europe was real. His achievements were real. And the erasure was deliberate. Today, if you visit certain European cities, you can still see his influence. Buildings with architectural styles that blend African and European elements, street names that, if you know the history, reference his era. Museums with artifacts they can't quite explain, showing advanced African metalwork from centuries before it should have existed there. His genetic legacy remains too. Millions of Europeans carry African DNA from this period. The bloodlines of his soldiers, his administrators, his settlers, run through European families who have no idea about their African heritage. The truth is coming out. Scholars are rewriting textbooks. Documentaries are being made. The hidden chapter is finally being revealed. So, why does this story matter? Why should you care about an African king from 1300 years ago? Because history shapes how we see the world today. When entire civilizations are erased from the record, when achievements are stolen and hidden, it distorts everything. It makes us think certain people have always been powerful and others have always been weak. It's a lie. Africa has always been a continent of great kingdoms, brilliant minds, and powerful armies. Europe has always been conquered, just like everywhere else. Understanding this changes everything. It breaks down the false narratives that still poison our world today. This is why I make these videos, to bring you the stories they don't want you to know, to show you the hidden chapters they erased, to remind you that history is far stranger, far more diverse, and far more incredible than what they taught in school. If this story shocked you, you need to subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell because I have dozens more stories like this one. Hidden histories that will blow your mind. Share this video with everyone you know. This is knowledge that needs to spread. Drop a comment telling me what shocked you most. And smash that like button to help this reach more people. Next week, I'm revealing another erased history. The story of an ancient African queen who commanded the largest navy on Earth. You won't believe what they did to her story. They tried to erase him from history. They failed. The truth survived in stones and bones, in DNA and documents, in whispers passed down through generations. His name was forgotten, but his impact remains. And now, finally, his story is being told again. Remember this: history is not fixed.